How are you, Kim?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm excited to be with you today.
Oh yeah, this is going to be fun. I know you have an interesting history, and I purposely have avoided trying to listen to all the podcasts and things that you've done because every time I start to listen, it's like, oh, this is really interesting. I don't want to know anymore. I want to find
You
out on
know,
my
I've
own.
I've gone through that with my kids. They avoid trying to listen to me at times as well. So,
I think it's for a different reason. I'm not sure of that,
okay,
but
okay.
it might be just that, or they've heard every story that you've ever
Yeah,
told.
no, that may be it.
Yeah. Well, they do. They know them all, and they just kind of roll their eyes. Here comes that one again.
Yeah, here comes Dad.
Yeah, I just was telling one to Josh Elliott's out here, and my son was out there, and was telling some story just a minute ago, and he'd heard it like 75 times, and it was painful for him to have to hear it the next time. I'm sure every time I embellish a little more, and it changes a little bit more.
I know the fish gets bigger.
So you and I have something very much in common. There's very few people that are from our region of New Mexico that have become, professional artists and successful ones. Peter Hurd being, of course, one, and I guess Henrietta Wyeth was in that area as well, right?
Well, she was from back east, but yes, Henriette was out here. Pete, there's you know, William Lumpkins. He was from
Yeah,
Clayton, New Mexico,
I did not know
and
that.
yeah, very very important. But
Yeah, I love
yes,
Lumpkin.
it's pretty rare to have a native New Mexican, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't. There's an artist that lives in Tucson that's from Portales, Jim Wade, also, who's
Oh,
very.
I know Jim. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's incredibly talented.
he is.
Love his.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I have one of his paintings. My wife and I just really love his work.
Yeah, I can see that. There's a correspondence, I think, in a weird way with what you do. Maybe it's just from kind of the way you approach a subject and color as what you do, I think. I can see that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of I don't know, a lot of ties with modernism to abstract and non-objective work.
Yeah.
I look at Bisttram, Emil Bisttram, for example, and I think he's a great example of that. Somebody that was able to jump from one to the other. At times daily, he would go from one painting to the next, and he might be working on a transcendental piece one day, and then the next day jump into a very realistic portrait of a Native American woman or something.
Yeah. Which type do you like better, or do you?
I don't think I have a preference, to be quite honest. My father did the book on Bisttram, and working on the project, he probably influenced me as much as any artist. I never met him, but his work influenced me. And just going through the book project, took over a year, and going through all of the paintings and images, from one to the next. It was incredible, an incredible project, and heavily influential in my life.
Oh yeah, I want to talk about that when we get to it, but I'll leave it a little bit. But what is the name of that book that your dad?
I put it right here. So.
Oh yeah, I have that book. I've had that book. I didn't know
Yeah.
your dad did that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's called Transcendental Painting of Emil Bisttram.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So for those people that aren't watching this on YouTube, if you are, you can actually see it. So yeah, let's start there. Let's go back to the beginning, because that's really, in your case, I know, you started out really early with, as an artist, but when you were, so you grew up in, well, not in Roswell, but just kind of outside of Roswell, right?
That's correct. I grew up north of town, about 20 miles on a ranch north of Roswell. Both of my grandparents were ranchers, and so we had that on both sides of our family. And it was probably a wonderful way to raise kids as well for my parents.
Yeah. So were you far enough out that you'd have to take the bus and it would take you an hour to get to school every day?
Yeah, that was it. That was the process. Usually tried to be on time up to the road, and it was a dirt road, and numerous times it was like running half a mile up to the road and trying to catch the bus before it took off without you.
And they probably waited for you because they knew, right?
Yeah, sometimes they did. Most of the time, if they saw, that we were coming, well, they would wait. And
Yeah.
we had some ridiculous stories and stuff. I remember one time I was trapping on our place, and I made extra money with that, and I had a skunk early one morning. I'd gone to check the traps, and they were 2 miles away on one of the locations, and there was a skunk in the trap, and I had shot it and then went back to go get it out of the trap, and went to get it out, and it was still alive and sprayed me from one end to the other in payment for my misdeeds. And so anyway, I got back to the house and pulled up, and we had a little truck and stuff. And so I got out of the truck, and evidently the smell was so bad, my mother came running out the door and threw a shovel from off the porch, and she said, "Drop your clothes right there and bury them." So I was standing there burying my clothes, naked as a jaybird, and I heard the horn honking from the road, and it was the school bus. And all of the kids were hanging out the window looking at me, and everybody was applauding and stuff. And but that was sort of our life.
How old were you when that happened? Do you remember?
I don't know. I was let's see, I must have been in maybe seventh grade, sixth or seventh grade, something like that. I wasn't old enough to drive, but my mom taught us how to drive early. So
did she douse you in like tomato juice?
It was a week before I could go back to school. I mean, she tried tomato juice, she tried vinegar, all sorts of wild concoctions, and it just wouldn't come off. It was like a slime, and it was terrible. It was a terrible experience.
So it's funny you mentioned this, because today on my back of my house, there was a burrow that's been dug out, and I'm pretty sure it's a skunk. Any recommendations for, I was just going to put a water hose down there and try to encourage it to go to a different place, but any ideas?
Yeah, I think animal control handles it best, and they usually have a cage, and they trap them in a cage, and then they're able to take them and release them out in the wild. That's the best way to handle it.
Okay. Yeah, because I noticed that today, and I was like, I think I'm pretty sure I have a skunk. That's a hilarious story, by the way. I'll have to share that at some other time. I can only imagine seeing that. So when you're on that bus for an hour, were you drawing and doing things like that at that time?
At times. I mean, when your friends know you're an artist and stuff, well, they're always hitting you up to, draw funny faces. And I mean, nothing serious. Trust me, nothing serious, but just fun things. I did artwork from the time I was, I think maybe 3 years old. I started doing sculpture, and I would sit in front of the fireplace in the winter, and my parents were very good about buying supplies and things like that. My grandmother was an artist. My uncle was an artist. My father was a photojournalist. My mother loved art. And so that was just a part of our life. And, some of my first sculptures, I think I followed after Charlie Russell, really. If you go through some of his books and look at his small sculptures of wildlife, that's sort of what I patterned my work after eventually.
And you said it was your grandfather was an artist?
My grandmother.
Yeah. Was she a professional artist in the sense that she was to sell, or?
Yeah, she just did it for enjoyment, and she also was a pretty good photographer as well. But all of it was just for her own enjoyment. I mean, in this part of the country, nobody thought you could make a living as an artist. My uncle, he certainly was an artist, but made his living by going to he and my father both served in World War II. And when they got back, my uncle and my father both worked on the ranch for a time, and my uncle was maybe 8 years older than my father, and eventually went to my grandfather and said, I want my inheritance now.
Yeah.
And so, much like the biblical story in the New Testament, my grandfather sold half of everything he had, and he gave it to my uncle and said, "Okay, the rest of whatever I accumulate in my lifetime will go to Walt." And so that was how he made a living as an artist. He lived off of the proceeds. My grandfather had a large ranch, and so he lived off of that most of his life. And as a young man growing up, I didn't think you could make a living as an artist. I was not encouraged to make to pursue art, just because of, I suppose, my grandfather certainly, I'm sure, cringed whenever he saw me coming through the mill with artistic talent. And although my parents were very good about supporting me in the creativity process, I don't think my parents wanted me to pursue art as a means of making a living.
Did they want you to be a rancher? Did they want you to take over the family ranch?
By the time I was in high school, my father and mother sold the ranch, and my father had gone into the magazine business. My father was incredibly creative and brilliant. And anyway, I put one of his early magazines up here. Quarter Racing World was the initial name of the magazine, and now it's called the Speed Horse. And so, after school, by the time I got into high school, every day after school, I would leave school and go work in the art department at the magazine. And so I worked for the graphic artists that were at the magazine.
And he was doing photojournalism for the magazine. Is that where that came about?
He did photojournalism before this, I would say probably by 1947 or 48, after he got out of World War II, he had started doing adventure stories he worked for all the major magazines except for Time. He had work in Outdoor Life and Look and Sports Illustrated and Sports Afield and Argosy and True, Cavalier. He did adventure stories. And so he started doing.
Did he write and do photography?
Both. Yes. He was a photojournalist.
Yeah.
And in 1 year, he had 13 magazine covers in 1 year.
Wow.
And he was incredible. This is
Outdoor Life.
Outdoor Life. And this was before the days of telephoto lenses. And I've got a photo of him up in this tree, maybe 4 feet from a mountain line, photographing the mountain line that somebody else took. And so, he was incredibly adventurous, traveled all over the North and Central and South America. He was a pilot, and so he flew, he was a bush pilot, and so he flew his own plane and would fly into these places and do these incredible adventure stories. And so, I grew up on that kind of stuff, and certainly as a young boy was inspired and wanted to find my path doing something like that. I didn't want to be a photojournalist because I didn't want to compete with my dad, because he was like, up here in my mind. And I was afraid to try and compete in an area that he made a living in.
But he didn't really want you to go into the art world.
He was very nervous about it. I went into the military right out of high school and served 6 years. I got out, I guess, 1982. And during that time in the military, I still painted. I couldn't take my sculpture supplies. I spent 5 years in Europe. And so it was too, the sculpture supplies were just too heavy. So anyway, I took paint, and my parents, I remember they sent me a oil paint ever so often while I was overseas. I did a lot of outdoor painting, impressionistic work. That's what I first did as far as painting. I was an impressionist. And after I got back, well, I guess first of all, I need to go to when I was 12 on our ranch. We had an art dealer from the Scottsdale, Phoenix area that was stopping at all the ranch headquarters going through New Mexico. And he got down to southeastern New Mexico, where our ranch was, and was visiting with my parents, trying to sell them some Western art paintings that he had. And he saw some of my sculpture. And after visiting with them, I think he had some paintings by Oleg Stravinsky. I don't know if you remember him or not.
Yeah, I do, very much so.
Okay. Anyway, after visiting with them, he asked if he could take some of my small sculpture out to Arizona and cast it into bronze. And so he started marketing my bronze work around 1972 or so, something like that. I think I was maybe around 12 years old, and marketed that through high school. I was at my mom's this morning and borrowed one of the sculptures. This is nice. A piece from about 1976.
It does have that kind of Charlie Russell feel to it.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, does, for sure.
Is that a wolf or a coyote?
It's a wolf.
Yeah.
Actually, a very fat wolf.
Yeah.
But anyway, that so that was my introduction to the art market. But I didn't, when I left high school, I didn't think I'd be able to make a living as an artist. When I got out of the military, I went to school in Dallas for a while, and then I moved back to New Mexico. And he called me sort of out of the blue. And it was probably 1980, the end of 82 or beginning of 83. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually painting. I'm not doing sculpture anymore. I've sort of gotten out of that, and I'm working in oil." And he said, "Well, meet me on the plaza. I'd like to take a look at some of your work." And so
this is in Santa Fe Plaza?
In Santa Fe, yes.
And who is this art dealer? What's this art dealer?
His name was Jim Clark. Do you
remember?
remember?
What was his gallery? What was Jim's gallery? Do you remember?
I think it was Jim Clark Fine Art. He was later on, he ended up going in business with my father, and they started the gallery Clark Wiggins, and had that for a number of years. And then my father ended up buying him out and started a gallery in Santa Fe. He and my mother did, called Wiggins Fine Art.
I remember that.
And,
I just didn't know that was your dad.
It was on Canyon Road in Santa Fe in the late 1980s, early 90s.
So in 82, he comes and knocks on your door again, and you say, "I'm doing paintings now."
Right. And so he's at that point, he took some of my work. I think he picked out maybe 8 or 10 paintings and took them back to Arizona and sold one the next day. And he called me on the phone, and he said, "Hey, I sold one of your paintings. You better get busy." And so, it was the first light that really came on in my own life that sort of said, "Okay, you know what? There might be an avenue for you here." And so I started painting at night, just working really hard on the weekends, working really hard. And, I got my first check from him maybe a week later, and it was for $500. And it was more money than I made in my job working all month. And so I became very serious. By 1983, the Lord opened the doors, and I was invited into the Society of American Impressionists. And it was a national society that had 30 members. And they invited me in. Jim had shown them my work, and they invited me in as the youngest member in the nation. I think I was 25 or 26, maybe something like that. And they were just fixing to have their first show in Phoenix. And I didn't have enough work to get together for the show. And so I ended up pulling things together for the next show, which was in St. Louis the next year. And that was the first major art show that I ever attended. And, it had artists like Gonski and Goebel and Robert Daughters and Sandy Scott and Alan Walton. And I mean, all of these icons, for me, I mean, they were, the hot market at that time in Southwest Art Magazine and all of these other places. And so I walked into the place in St. Louis and I saw one of my paintings hanging way, way, way across the room. And I was so excited. I was, shaking and I shot across the room to go look at it. And I got maybe about 8 or 10 feet from it. And I realized it wasn't my work. And it devastated me. Now, my work sold, I sold out. At most of the shows, my work sold out during that time. But I realized that I would never really be able to make any type of a mark in the art world if I didn't develop my own style.
Right.
And so at that point, I came back from the show very discouraged, even though I had money in my pocket. I started searching at that point to try and create something unique of my own.
And you hadn't, at that point, you hadn't really done any much formal schooling for art, right?
None. I was self-taught. From the time I was a child.
I do have a question.
Just observation. My parents were friends with all of these different artists. I saw artwork all the time. I mean, they were great friends with Peter Hurd and Henriette Wyeth and Randall Davey, and my father knew Raymond Johnson and all of these other great artists. And I just I saw art all the time. My uncle was an artist, and
you knew Hogue too, didn't you? Alexandre Hogue. Didn't you know Hogue as well?
Hogue, yes. Hogue was really my greatest mentor. Right about that time, I started, there were a couple of galleries that started handling my work. Joe Wade up in Santa Fe started handling my work.
Yep.
And Rosequist out in Tucson started handling it. And then Jeff Klein in Tulsa, Oklahoma started handling it.
Yep.
And so my father knew Hogue's work. I mean, he was a member of the Dallas Nine, and was really an iconic painter of the Dust Bowl era.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when I was up there, I was visiting with Jeff Klein, the dealer, and he talked to my father, and my father said, "You know what? Alexandre Hogue lives somewhere up in your part of the country. You need to look him up." And so anyway, Jeff went out to his place, and I went with him, and he ended up meeting with Alexandre Hogue and making an agreement with him to handle his work. The next year rolled around, and Jeff wanted to have a one-man show for Hogue, and he found out that Hogue he only painted maybe 2 paintings a year.
Yeah, he painted
3 at tops.
Yeah. Yep.
And so Jeff called me up and he said, "Hey, I visited with Alexandre and he said it would be okay. I would like to ask you to join him for a 2-person show. And we're going to sort of advertise it as the young, shooting star and the great master."
Yeah. How old was Hogue at that time? How old was he?
He died in 94 and he was 96 then. So he was in his mid 80s.
Yeah.
And I was in my mid 20s.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he took me under his wing, and I had 5 different 2-man shows with him.
Wow.
From that point on up through 1990, maybe 93 in Santa Fe. That was the last one. And he gave me incredible guidance and direction and wisdom and critiqued my work. And, he was a hard taskmaster. And he'd look at my work and say, "What do you think you're doing here? This is ridiculous. You don't paint this way. Give me your brushes. I'm going to break them." And then he'd come around and put his arm around me and say, "No, I'm just kidding with you. You're doing good. But look, you need to do this." And so he gave me a lot of guidance and a lot of direction during those formative years. And he influenced my work unlike anyone else. If you look at Hogue's work,
Right.
and you look at my work, you
Yep.
cannot miss the influence.
Yeah, no, I see that. I definitely, and it's funny because I've always been a huge Hogue fan.
Yeah.
So it makes
Great
sense.
artist.
Yeah, and I've always loved your work. So that makes total sense that there would be that. What do you think the one big takeaway was that Hogue gave you, in all those, shows that you did and the time you spent with him?
I think the biggest thing that he drove into my mind is never become a slave to photorealism.
Yeah, interesting. Yep.
That was his principle.
Yeah.
His principle was that creativity suffered if you became a slave to photorealism.
Yeah.
And so, that's something that he hammered over and over and over and over and of course, his work has elements of realism, but he's a modernist. You look at the work,
sure.
and there's, the simplified forms and, the dramatic light and the linear distortion and all of these different things that, high-keyed color that make for great modernistic work.
So you're, 26 to 30 when you're doing these. What was your take? You're working with this great master. You recognize he's a master, and when you're doing these shows, people come in and they're bowing to him, I'm sure. What do you think, for your own trajectory? I mean, that had to be, that's like, touring with the Rolling Stones, right?
It was, for sure. Everybody knew him, and I was. I have so much that I owe to him. I can't even begin to add up what I owe to him. Collectors from the past came to the shows and then started collecting my work, and writers came to the show and then started looking at my work, and galleries came to the show and then started looking at my work. There's really no way I can add up what I owe him. He gave me something that I believe had been given to him when he was a young man, and he wanted to pay it forward. When he was a young man, in 1920, he started making trips out to Taos, New Mexico, and he met Ernest Blumenschein, and Blumenschein took him under his wing and started mentoring him and giving him guidance. Blumenschein's daughter, Helen, became one of Hogue's best friends. And from 1920 all the way up through the mid-30s, Hogue went out to Taos almost every year, and at times stayed 3 or 4 months with the Blumenscheins. And so I just really feel like, and if you look at Hogue's work, you see the influence from Blumenschein.
Oh, yeah,
now,
I can see that.
Hogue said, I was never influenced by him. And so he didn't like the term influence. But you can use whatever term you want. You can see the influence from Hogue's work in 1920, and you start looking at it in the early 30s and beyond. You cannot help but see the powerful modernistic influence that Blumenschein had on Hogue.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, Dixon was out in Taos from July of 31 till January 32. So it'll be, and I don't know if he knew Hogue, but I guarantee you, if he was out there at the same time, they got together, because Blumenschein
and Bisttram.
Yeah, and Dixon
was out there as well.
Yeah, right. Dixon was good friends with Blumenschein and Dutton.
Yeah,
he knew them.
He sure was.
Yeah, and I'm sure he would have known Bisttram too, because Bisttram, spent time down in Mexico and knew Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, and Dixon knew those guys as well. In fact, had just done. They had just been to San Francisco to meet them. So it'd be interesting. I'll have to do a little research on that just to see if he ever knew.
Yeah, Bisttram had left New York, and he dropped his wife off in Taos in 31, and he went to study with Rivera under a Guggenheim fellowship.
Yep.
And studied with him for about a year, and then came back to Taos. Of course, you can see Rivera's influence, especially in his portraiture work. I don't know if you ever saw the great pieces that were at the hotel on the plaza there in Taos.
Right. Yep.
Psychic of Ours had these massive paintings. One was of a cowboy, and the other one was a beautiful indigenous woman and stuff, and very heavy in the Mexican muralist tradition.
Yeah. So at this point, let's just talk about your dad and the Bisttram stuff. I know it's not you, but it's such an interesting thing. And the Transcendental School is really kind of shot into the forefront again with the exhibit that's going on right now. I know it was in Albuquerque and it's a traveling show, but how did your dad get involved with Bisttram's work, and what was that story?
Okay. The tie really goes back to my mother. My mother lived out in Arizona, and she would travel to Santa Fe. She loved art, and she ran into an artist named Alfred Morang.
Yeah, I know who he is.
And started collecting his work.
Yeah.
And so she had a number of Alfred Morang paintings when my father met her and married her back in, I think they were married in 1962, I believe, something like that. And so anyway, my father and my mother ended up, my father was a photojournalist. Then he went into the horse business, the quarter horse business, and he managed the public relations at the racetrack at Ruidoso Downs in southern New Mexico. Then he went into, and at that same time that they went into ranching, and he ended up pulling out of ranching and going into the magazine business. Then he sold that and he went into the art business. And so he went into the art business while I was in the military. And so he goes into the art business. He had a big Peter Hurd egg tempera that he traded off to get into the art business. And he had done a number of projects with Pete and for Pete. And that was sort of payment that had been made years before. And it was a beautiful painting called Alamogordo Ranch. And so anyway, he and my mother went into the art business. And my father just became very interested in reading about Alfred Morang. Alfred Morang was one of the members of the Transcendental Painting Group in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And he had died in a fire in 1954 and was burned to death along with 200 cats that lived in his studio with him. Yep. And you can still see murals by Alfred Morang that are up on Canyon Road. One of the bars further up on Canyon Road still has his murals and stuff. And he was painted Ladies of the Evening and very much a Van Gogh type of artist, just hauntingly, unusual. Yes. So anyway, my father decided I want to do a book on Alfred Morang. So what my father would do when he started a book project is he and my mother would go out and buy every painting they could find by the artist that they could afford to buy. Right. Morang's work was not worth a lot during those days. And so he and my mother bought a lot of work. And then my father started working on the book project. He was able, through Dorothy Morang, Alfred Morang's widow, to get a lot of information. Morang was a very prolific writer. He was sort of like you. I mean, he was like the man that had the radio program in Santa Fe during the 30s and 40s, and everybody looked to him for wisdom because he was so incredibly knowledgeable. He was a violinist. He was involved in the symphony. He was involved in the arts in multiple facets, whether it was writing or painting or music or whatever. And so anyway, it was an incredible book that came out. And so the next logical book in the series was Emil Bisttram. Mm-hmm. And so I came back to New Mexico just as my father finished up the Morang book and started working on the Bisttram project. My parents went to Taos. I believe that Philip Anschutz had already bought a number I mean, a large number of Bisttrams from the estate. And my father and mother bought the remaining portion of the Bisttram estate.
Mm.
And, this included some of his greatest works of art that were transcendental, because most of the people at that time were avoiding
Right.
the transcendental work.
Yep.
And so my parents bought, this massive amount of paintings by Bisttram, and I went and helped them move all of the artwork back to southern New Mexico. My father started the project, and it took a lot of work. You didn't do a book project like you do today, where you go on Shutterfly or one of these things on the internet and lay a book out. This was laid out the same way that the magazine was laid out when I studied as a young man, working for the magazine. And so I helped him lay out the book, and helped him with the locating images and contacting museums and all of those different things. And my father dedicated the book to me after he wrote it, because I helped him so much on it. And I was also able to study all of these works of art right there. I mean, these paintings were stacked up in our home, and my father's office. They were hanging on the wall, and so I received an incredible amount of information during that book project. The next book project he worked on after that was William Lumpkins, and unfortunately, Raymond Johnson had died. Johnson, my father wanted to do the book on Johnson next, but he passed away. Lumpkins was still alive. And so my father was like, wow, he's the last living link to this incredible group of painters. And so by that time, we were living up in Santa Fe, and my father contacted Mr. Lumpkins, and they worked out an agreement. And, Mr. Lumpkins was an incredibly generous, kind man. He came by. I lived up on Canyon Road at that time. He would come by the studio like 3 or 4 times a week on his walk. And he would come into the studio. He might visit, with my dad during the day. But in the afternoon, he'd come by and sit down in my studio and visit with me about my work. And, he was an abstract expressionist. But there's such a tangible link between modernism and abstract expressionism. And, I learned so much from him, went to his studio, a good bit during those days. And, he had a lot of work that was in his studio that was unsold. And, like I said, the Transcendentalists were not the hot ticket back
not
in
at
those.
all. And that would have been kind of that he was working on it in the mid
88 to 92.
late 80s. Yeah, I was going to say, okay, 88 to 92. Yeah.
Mhm.
I actually think I bought a Kachina piece that was in your dad's book.
Okay.
His transcendental book. And
Was it a Bisttram then?
yeah, Bisttram. Yeah. Did he work with somebody out of Taos as well, with promoting some of the sales of those pieces?
Yeah. Jim Parsons
Yeah, that's what
handled a lot of the estate. The
Yep.
things that my parents didn't buy everything. They sort of went through and picked out the very best work
Yep.
they could find and bought that. And then there were some pieces I think that may have been held back as well. And then they came out later. So those pieces continued to be marketed through Jim Parsons. I know that I bought a piece from Jim Parsons, maybe around 90, I don't know, maybe it's 88 or 89. Maybe it wasn't into the 90s. But I was having a drink with Jim in a bar up in Santa Fe, and he said, "Hey, I just located this great Bisttram, and it's of a Hispanic woman. It's beautiful, and it's in this lady's closet, and she doesn't know what to do with it. She doesn't like it."
Yep.
And so I went over to her house and made her an offer on it and bought it, and it ended up going into the Bisttram book. So I had to have bought it. I don't know what year the book came out, maybe 88 or 89, something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah,
But
that's
it was
right.
it was a massive, just incredibly. It's like a 30 by 40. It's a beautiful piece.
Hopefully you still have it.
I don't, but I wish I did.
Yeah.
But I do have 5 kids that went through college. So
There you go. Yeah. No,
my wife and I, we always kid ourselves. I've been entrusted. I've been a trustee of some great works of art, and a lot of it has gone to help get my kids through college and things like that.
That's a good way to do it. I mean, that's what art's for, right? I mean,
it is for sure.
Yeah, whether it's your own art as an artist or, things that you've had, I don't have any problems with that in my own life, my own family and others. And I've bought a lot of art for that reason. I've always felt that's a wonderful way to use art as something to enjoy, and have it be part of your family. And then, you leverage it when you need to, and somebody else gets to have it. So I get it.
That's very true.
So that had to be very influential, all these guys, Lumpkins, and you're just being around the art that your dads and mom are selling, as well as developing the books. I do find it interesting that they're in the art business. You just get out of the military and you're going to go back to trying to make it as an artist, and they're not really going, you should do this. I find that interesting.
Yeah, that I suppose is interesting. I think they, number one, they felt like I had a gifting with people and that I would make a great art dealer. My father, I remember whenever my style started developing. And so I had a number of shows from 1988, 1989, 1990 that had elements of what I do today in my work. Mm-hmm. And in 1990, I had a show that was split right down the middle. And I decided to sort of pursue it that way. Half of the show was impressionistic. Half of the show was the modernistic work I do today. And I remember my father came and he put his arm around me and he said, "Son, I want you to know I love you, but I think you're making a mistake going into this new stuff. You are a member of a national organization. You've had all of these doors open for you, all of these collectors that have started buying your work, all of these shows you've been able to do with some of the top artists in the industry, and you are throwing that away." And so anyway,
what'd you say? What'd you think when you heard that? I mean, you have this great respect for your father. He's in the art business. He's a photojournalist. He knows a lot of things. I mean, what do you say or think when that happens?
I put my arm around him and gave him a hug and kissed him on the cheek. And I said, I understand, Dad, I understand. And that's all I could say. Yeah. And the next year was the year I totally transformed. And, that, like I said, that was 90, maybe 91. Well, I'm not sure which, I don't remember which year now. But that next year, I remember my dad came up after the show and put his arm around me. And he said, "Son, I want you to know I love you. And I think you made the right decision."
He saw
and, he passed away 2 years later. Yeah. And he critiqued every painting I did until the day he passed away. Yeah. And so he had this powerful influence in my life, and I had no idea what I could do or would be able to do when he passed away. He talked to me, he found out he had cancer about 6 months before he passed, and I remember he called me into his office and he said, "Son, I need to talk to you." At that point, we split our time. I was partners with he and my parents on the gallery. And he would work half of the time running the gallery, and I would work half of the time running the gallery. He would write his books. I would paint. And so he called me into the gallery and he said, I need to talk to you. And I know this is difficult, but I need you to run the gallery and take the gallery over when I pass away. And, it was just the most difficult thing in my life. I loved him so much. And, he was just asking me to, he said, I want you to take care of your mother. I'm not going to be here. And, you know what you're doing, you've been doing this with me for years. For the last 8 years, I worked with him every single day, every day. And I know, that the Lord gave me that extra time with him because I wouldn't be able to be with him from that point on. And anyway, I told him, I said, well, Dad, I said, let me pray about it. I don't know what to tell you. I really don't. And man, I'm telling you, the next couple of weeks, I just struggled so hard trying to figure out, what do I do? I don't want to disappoint my dad. I love him so much. And yet I don't want to make a living as an art dealer. That's not my passion. My passion is my art. And so anyway, after I put it off as long as I could, and after a couple of weeks, I went into his office there in Santa Fe, and I put my arms around him and gave him a hug and gave him a kiss. And I said, Dad, I can't do it. And I said, but I'll find somebody to buy the gallery. And so Mom's taken care of. And so anyway, when my father passed, I started visiting with a number of different dealers that I knew, and ended up going up to Tulsa and visiting with Jeff Klein. And I said, Jeff, I know you love Tulsa. I know you've always loved the oil business, but Santa Fe's a better market, and you know that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Jeff ended up purchasing the gallery and ended up taking care of my mom, and also Jeff started handling my work in the same gallery that I had been in for years. And so anyway, God worked it all out, and it was a difficult time, but I learned a lot and grew a lot as an individual.
I bet that was in 92.
That was in 92. He
Yeah,
passed away. He was born on May 13th, 1926, and died on August 13th, Black Friday, both of them on Friday the 13th. He always said it was his lucky day, Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And I remember I took a painting, and he was in my parents' home in Ruidoso in southern New Mexico in the mountains. And he had been in bed maybe for about a month, I guess, the last month. And I took a painting, a still life I had been working on called Cycle of Life. And it was of a skull and an Indian blanket that my father had given me for my birthday, and some flowers that my mother had given me. And so it was called Cycle of Life because, the skull looked sort of, it just represented death. And then here's these incredible flowers that are coming to life. And this tangible object, this blanket that had been given to me that represented the love that we shared between each other as father and son. And I remember showing it to my dad, and my dad looked at it, and he didn't say anything, but tears started coming down his face and stuff. And I remember thinking, well, enough said on that. That's the shortest critique he's ever given me.
Oh, yeah.
But enough said. And then in a few minutes, he picked up a photograph. And my dad he just had a beautiful spirit. He was a real jokester and stuff, and picked up this photograph, and he was going like this on the photograph. And I said, yeah, Dad, that's you and I. And he shakes his head, and he was real tired and stuff. And he taps on the photograph again and goes like this. Yeah. And I said, yeah, Dad, that's of you and I. And he goes like this. And I said, what? And he taps on it again and holds his finger there. And I said, are you telling me I need a haircut? And he was holding his finger over the back of my hair in the photo, telling me it was time for me to go get a haircut. And so anyway, that was just sort of the way my father was. He had a great, sense of humor, and, all the way until he passed.
And he was in the military in World War II, and I'm sure that also had some influence on him as well.